All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the end. We are gathered here for our final keynote lecture of the day. It would be perhaps a bit rude of me or to our previous keynotes to say that we have saved the best for last, but I am adamant that what we're about to see is well worth the wait. Katy Montgomerie stands at the intersection of tech, music, and activism. From her beginnings as an electronic engineer to her emergence as a metal guitarist and a powerful voice for trans rights and feminism, she has built a multifaceted career. Through writing, speaking engagements, social media, and music, Katy challenges norms and inspires change for LGBTQ+ communities and beyond. Katy will be speaking to us about her experiences as a trans advocate on the internet and the ways our community can carve out improbable victories in a hostile media world. And she will do so with her presentation, Combating the Gender Critical Movement. I ask you all to give a very warm welcome to Katy Montgomerie.
Hello. Can you hear me on the microphone? Is the microphone? Yeah, it's working. So yeah, welcome to my talk, Combating the Gender Critical Movement. You did just get an intro of who I am, but I just thought I'd cover that again. So you could ask who I am, or you could say, and what about this odd Katy Montgomerie woman? What has bitten her? That was Baroness Nicholson of Winterbourne. So what has bitten me? I am an internet argument lady. I do too much argument on the internet. I'm a feminist, the real kind, who believes in women's rights and not just oppressing trans people. An LGBT activist. You might know me from the Transatlantic Call-In Show, or Turf Wars, or maybe The Atheist Experience, or Talk Heathen, or Truth Wanted, blah, blah, blah. I'm also a guitarist in a thrash death metal band, if anyone's interested. And I'm also an engineer, boring. But none of that is the real reason why I'm here. The reason I am here, I think, and where you might want to hear from me, is I've spent pretty much every day of my life for the last 10 years talking to the best people on earth. Gender criticals. I think we all know what the gender critical movement is, but I'm just going to focus on certain bits of it. So the gender critical movement is the British anti-trans movement, and it's not really any different to any other trans movement, anti-trans movement like the US one, in its goals. But the way in which it presents itself is very different. So they really specialize in being respectable. They're not like the American transphobes who say everything out loud. They try and keep everything quiet and sneaky dog whistles, and they downplay everything they want. And they also, their other main attribute is they pretend to be feminists. It's the gender critical feminist movement. So they use feminist sounding language, and they do kind of have some radical feminist roots, but that's not really what we're focusing on, and they've kind of moved on from that. The main things are that they are really overrepresented in the British media and in politics. They're also quite culty. They're very, very good at propaganda, and they're very well funded. At least one wacky billionaire is on their side. Quite a few, actually, I think. So I kind of want to talk about what I do in this respect, which is arguing with them, which kind of sounds rubbish because I think a lot of people think arguing with bigots in general is a waste of time, and it can be. So I'm going to argue why it can be good. So one of the things that I think is most important about arguing with these people is that you lot might all know why trans rights are good, and you might know why trans healthcare is good and why it works and all these kinds of things. And the gender criticals know all of their anti-trans arguments, and those arguments get pasted everywhere in the news, etc. And most of the public, most cis people, they're not even exposed to the pro-trans argument at all. And I think if you see an anti-trans, someone saying something in a comment, and you just reply once with a quick, actually, this is the truth, here's a link, done, then bystanders can learn our positions. I think that's quite important. And I also think it's very important to show the transphobes that there is some resistance. They need to know they can't just walk over us. They need to know that their crappy arguments aren't going to hold up, that they are embarrassing. They need to be shamed for their horrible, hypocritical, internally inconsistent positions. And I think it does, like, it helps us create our message and our arguments, because I think there are some pro-trans arguments which have been picked up by the mainstream, which are really kind of weak. Like, the spirit of them is good. Oh, you want to support trans rights, but if you say, oh, well, I support trans rights because sex and gender are different, end. That's not really an argument, but it's a thing that people say a lot, and it is technically true. But if you get engaged with arguing with gender criticals, they'll soon shoot down your first level arguments, and you realize you have to create these better, like more concisely worded, more strong, powerful arguments, and you can learn that from arguing with them. I think it's really important as well to show other trans people, especially people who are new coming out and younger people, that there's resistance. Like, when you see wall-to-wall anti-trans coverage in the news all the time, it can be easy to feel like isolated on your own, that like no one's standing up for you, or it can even make you feel crazy and feel like maybe I am wrong. But if you see other trans people, and I even get this too, if I see other trans people or cis allies arguing back against these horrible people, you feel like you have a community and you feel like stronger and you feel like you can then do it. And I think it can help other people like stay sane, basically. Yeah, so it helps with the community morale, I think. And happens to be what I'm good at. And I do think that I think it's good for you to do whatever you're good at. I think we need everyone who cares about trans rights doing something, ideally. But not everyone is good at like talking on stage or arguing on the internet or whatever. But maybe you're really good at organizing conferences, or maybe you're really good at like studying the law or all these kinds of things. And we need all of these different things. So if you are useless at everything, but you're an argumentative like so-and-so like me, then maybe you should also be arguing. And it might change their mind. I used to hold that position. I think it is possible to change gender critical people's minds, but I think realistically, if someone's full on like cultist type, you need to engage with them every single day for years to like de-radicalize someone. I have done it, and I've poured like thousands of hours into trying to de-radicalize some people, but there's low odds and it takes up so much time and energy, and it's so demoralizing when you get someone halfway and then they spiral back. I think you should never aim to try and change someone's mind. You should be more about the other things, showing bystanders and helping trans community morale. So I've got some important tips if you do want to start arguing with people. And the top one is stay sane. It's very easy to completely like lose your mind. I think probably my top thing, if you ever feel the need to engage with a gender critical person, you don't have to at all. It's totally good to just completely ignore them. But if you ever feel the need to, never use yourself or someone you care about as an example. If you're talking about sexual assault and you've been sexually assaulted, never say, the time when I was sexually assaulted, this happened, what do you think for this? You know, my child, this, because they will make you feel absolutely terrible about it. They'll laugh at it, they'll say you deserved it, they'll say you wanted it, they'll say you're lying about it, all together, all at the same time. And like that ties in with this, don't expect that they have some line at which they will no longer stoop. Don't think that there'll be a point where you'll have this shared humanity and then you can build up, like certainly when they're on the internet and they're not seeing you face to face, that isn't going to happen. I've had a lot of experience of this. Like sometimes I've been in a position where I'm talking with someone one-on-one for weeks, months even, like a gender critical person, and they do all their little like, oh, you're different from the other trans people, you're not as bad, you're not the ones I want to go for, you're one of the good ones, or this kind of stuff. And you get them down to the point and you think, I'm de-radicalizing this person, great. You're like, okay, so if I was in a situation where I had to use a women's shelter, just me personally, and you know me, you know what I'm like, and you know I'm not a threat to people, if I was in that position and I had nowhere else to go, and then someone in the shelter said, I don't like this person because they're trans, do you think I should be kicked out in the street? And they'll just say, yep, because they just do not see you as an equal human. And that is so painful to experience when you've like attempted to engage with these people, that you should just write that off as ever happening, because it protects your sanity. I think it's really important to stay safe. Like, don't ever use your real name. is something I now recommend to everyone. I think it's a really bad idea to do it. If you've already done it, it's too late. But I think anyone who's starting out trans activism, just like they probably will find out your real name eventually, but it's just better if they don't know it. Don't ever mention where you are currently. Don't say, "Oh, I'm going to the, this train station," or "I'm going to this sporting event" or something. People are crazy, and just be aware that they can dox you from almost anything. I don't know if anyone remembers the fiasco with Clara Soronetti, who was also known as Keffels, when she got swatted and then she had to go to a hotel, and then she posted a photo of just her cat on the hotel bed, and within hours they worked out which hotel she was at from just the patterns on the bedding, like crazy stuff. Stay focused. When you're, like, we were just looking at on the last slide, if you're like, I'm going to argue with this person, then just think, what am I doing here? What is my point? Am I just venting rage? In which case it's a waste of your life. You should be like, I want to present the counter argument, because in this comment section it's all dickheads, and sorry, I don't know if I can swear or not. And I'm just going to say, well, actually, here's the counter argument, and then I'm going to mute the whole thing and go away, because that is my goal. It's just to break counter information, and it'll stop you getting embroiled in some 15-hour-long argument with someone who's prepared to just completely flip their position on the dime and waste your life. So just going to break up the talk a little bit with a few cat breaks. This is my beautiful cat, Poppy. She's lovely. She smells as good as she looks like she smells. So, Turf Island, that's where we all live, or that's where lots of us live. I want to talk about specifically the gender criticals and how to approach them as opposed to transphobes in general. And one of there's a few core strategies the gender criticals have, and one of them is this thing that I call, or other people also call, concealing their power level, which is a term which comes from the alt-right in the US, where the idea is, no matter how extreme your beliefs are, you don't ever present them truthfully, what you believe. You always pretend to be a moderate or a centrist, and you always only ever slightly let on to what you might fully believe. So an example in the gender critical framing is, if you said, what is gender critical? They would say, well, I simply believe that biological sex is binary and immutable, and that is it. And if you just push them a little bit more, they'll be like, well, I want to also ban trans healthcare for children and adults up to 25 and over 25s, and also want to ban trans people from women's spaces and men's spaces, and then also ban trans people from all sports and blah, blah, blah. And they actually want to remove all trans people's rights, but they don't ever want to just tell you that up front. We probably all know this, but just to cite my claim that they do hold extreme views and hide them from the general public. 3 just quotes from leading gender critical people and organizations. The classic one, Janice Raymond, who says, the problem of transsexualism would be best served by morally mandating it out of existence. Helen Joyce, of course, we have to try and limit the harm, and that means reducing or keeping down the number of people who transition, because every one of those people is a huge problem to a sane world. And obviously, the WDI Declaration just straight up calls to eliminate transgenderism. These are all guiding people and organizations in the gender critical movement in the UK. If you're calling yourself gender critical and you don't agree with these 3, then what the hell are you doing? You're probably lying. So anyway, why do they do this? I don't ever need to feel, I don't ever feel the need to hide what I believe. If someone's like, what's your position on trans people? I'm like, I think all trans people should have healthcare and human rights. I don't need to do a dog whistle, and they absolutely do all the time. And I think there's a few reasons. One is it allows them to always have plausible deniability. It always allows them to weasel out of anything and not commit to something and save their reputation. They don't want to look like bad people, and if they say, I think we should eliminate trans people from public life, then everyone will be like, you sound like a bad person. But if they say something like, well, I simply think that sex is biological, then they can always back off and pretend that all they wanted to do was say science or something. And it also, I think this is a really strong thing that they do all the time, is it then allows them to frame us as hysterical or hyperbolic or crazy. If they, the classic is, they'll say, sex is real, and then you're like, oh, okay, this person is a J.K. Rowling fanatic, they hate trans people, like, they're obviously a horrible person. And then like, you're calling me a fascist just because I said sex is real? You're crazy. This is what trans people are all like. And like, it's a strategy they use in the media to frame trans people as like unreasonable. That's why no one should even bother listening to us, is because we flip out from like the craziest things. When we all know exactly what they mean. And the other like side to this is, if they give it a progressive framing, it just hides it from a lot of people. Like, it might seem crazy when you're quite involved in this and you think, well, they're not saying anything feminist at all. They're just saying, I'm a feminist and then we should eradicate trans people. But it does confuse people. Some people are like, oh, well, I guess I support feminists. I like women's rights. And then two different people come along and say, I'm a feminist. You're like, this is out of my domain. I'm not going to get involved in this. And lastly, I think it helps them convince themselves that what they're doing isn't evil. They don't always necessarily want to say, oh yeah, I want to create a world without trans people in it, which is like what gender criticals aim to do in general. But if they say, oh, well, I simply believe in biological sex and I just think that policy should be based upon sex and, you know, that's whatever else happens, I'm just wringing my hands of it. It's not my fault if we end up with concentration camps. I think a lot of them hide behind that. So, how do I combat this part specifically when I'm arguing with them? I think one of the most important things is they are always going to try and describe themselves as reasonable, centrist, like just normal people. And I never let them get away with that. I think it's really important to always challenge that. If they say, I'm a gender critical feminist and I simply believe in women's rights and that sex is biological, then you need to say, when you say you believe in women's rights, do you mean that you're actually fighting for things like abortion? Or do you just mean that you want to ban trans people from the toilets? Like, actually confront them on those things. This person claims to be a feminist, but they've never done any feminist activism at all, and the only thing they ever do is call trans women men on Twitter. And that means, like, it's good to just explicitly ask them. Like, you'll often see them, and you get that kind of sense. Is this person, they're just trying to do dog whistles, or they're trying to be a centrist? Just be like, okay, do you want to ban trans people from the toilet in the workplace? Yes or no? That's quite an easy question to answer. And they'll often, normal people will be like, no. But a lot of gender criticals will be like, well, I just believed in biological sex. And you're like, that isn't what I asked. And you just need to really drill down it. And you've got to get them to say it out loud. I think that's the point I have later on. Another way of like breaking through their kind of shield they're putting up, other than like forcing them to like take a position on something, is to try and get them to take a position on like those quotes that I just highlighted. Okay, you're saying you're gender critical, but you're also saying you're reasonable, or you're trying to say that you don't really have any issue with trans people, but like, okay then, can you say that you disagree with Janice Raymond or Helen Joyce or Mayor Forstater when they say this? And they won't be able to. And I think that's one of the big differences between like minority rights movements, particularly like the trans rights movement, and the gender critical movement is, if I said something like immoral, you'd all shred me in a second. And I think that's good. I think that it's important we do that to a degree. But I think that you know, believing in what's right and what you think is correct is like the important thing. And I think that's how we get to feminism. I think that's how we get to trans rights. Gender criticals is much more like just a classic hierarchy, and J.K. Rowling is at the top, she is the god, and then like Helen Joyce and Mayor Forstater are like, you know, bishops or whatever, and they can't criticize them because like you can't criticize the people at the top. It's just not allowed. So they'll be like, well, I understand why you might have an issue with it. It's like, just tell me, do you think that eliminating, like morally mandating transsexualism out of public life is good or bad? They're going to lie about it, and this probably sounds really like negative, and if you've never really encountered the gender critical movement before, you might be like, Katy sounds like she's just like really hates these people and is kind of exaggerating. I promise, I have argued with these people every single day for 10 years. I think lying is just completely standard for the behavior online. You do get people who will just straight up say, I hate you because you're a slur. But often, like a real classic thing that I've experienced honestly thousands of times is I'll say, the gender critical movement is bad because it seeks to ban trans people like me from the toilets at work. And they'll be like, no, I don't want to do that. And then you press them and you just reply like 3 or 4 times. And then in the space of an hour, they'll say, and that's why you should be banned from the toilet at work. Like you probably, if you've ever argued with a gender critical, you have experienced this because this is like a fundamental pattern that they do. They will say, I don't believe this, and 5 minutes later they'll believe it. It's important to learn all the dog whistles for this kind of stuff because when they say sex is real, you might be like, I guess so. I mean, yeah. But you don't realise maybe until you've got involved in all their nonsense that that's a J.K. Rowling thing and what she means is biological sex is actually not a material property and it's just your birth sex and hormones don't exist, etc. Yeah, just make them say it out loud and don't let them waste your time. Here's Poppy at Christmas eating a salt and vinegar chipstick. She's enjoying it. She likes crisps. Anyway, so the next thing is false dichotomies and controlling the narrative. Gender critical people love binaries. There is nothing they love more than, well, after harming trans children, there's nothing they love more than binaries. So an example of this. Now, sex versus gender. Sex and gender aren't the same thing. However, I just want to explain how they managed to force this binary in to a point where it suddenly becomes terrible. So the gender critical would say, you must either segregate all of society by sex at birth or gender. And then that can like trick you into being like, well, I know what this person's up to. They're a horrible transphobic person. I'm going to argue against them. So then you take the other side to what they've presented. They've created the whole argument, and you are just taking up the opposite position. And they're the ones who have created the two positions. And this can, one, let them set it where it sounds like they're on the side of science, even though they're not, because they said sex, but they actually meant birth sex. And they've also defined sex and gender in both a way which are just complete nonsense. But you're now arguing against their position, which they've said is the science position, and you're arguing this like fake straw man, which they've created for you to defend. So, sorry if Dawn Butler ever watches this, but I don't know if you saw this clip a while ago. This was Dawn Butler versus Simon Clarke on the TV, and they were discussing trans people, and it was absolutely terrible, and all of the like centre-left liberals fucking loved it. Sorry for swearing. So, just a summary of what happened. Dawn said, how are you going to stop a man, a normal man, which already made me cringe enough, going into the women's toilets and saying he's a trans man, which isn't the greatest argument, but is an argument because, you know, the gender critical position is so rubbish. This effectively is a counter-argument. And then he said, the point is that people who are biologically men shouldn't be using the women's toilets. And it suddenly becomes clear at this point, he, despite going on TV to defend the Conservative Party's position, has literally never heard of a trans man before, doesn't know what a trans man is. Like, I promise he had no idea before. Like, you can see the cogs going in, like, behind his eye. He's like, hey, yeah. And then Dawn says, but a trans man who is biologically a woman would have to use the women's toilets. And it just made me want to scream. And all of the like liberals were like, oh, look at Simon Clarke being an idiot. And I just thought, this is just so terrible. And I think this is an example of where the gender criticals have created this argument of, we think that the world, how the world is there are biological men and there are biological women, and we think they should only use the toilets for the men and the women, and the other position is they can do what they want. And then Dawn obviously is a nice person and cares and thinks, I support trans rights, but then just listens to the gender critical framing and then says, oh, well, I think biological women should be allowed to use the men's toilets if they claim they're men or something. And then it's suddenly, you're like backing up their framing of the world. You're teaching people that this idea that trans men are biological women is true, even when it's biologically false and just a nonsense framing in general. So how I would take this on if I was doing this argument, I would avoid using this argument at all because I think it's kind of a rubbish argument. And also, the gender criticals want to ban trans men from the men's toilets as well, so rubbish anyway. But I would specifically point out that this is in response to their argument. So a cis man can pretend to be a trans man. So like your comment about anyone could pretend to be a trans woman applies to trans men too. So it's all just completely rubbish. And then he says, I'm an idiot. And then I would say, like, you need to cut this stuff off. You need to see what premises they're providing. When they're constructing this argument, they have a set of like implied premises, and the premises are wrong too. So you need to like directly take these on every single time. Trans women aren't biologically men. That claim is scientifically illiterate. Full stop. On to the next point, countering the next thing. Trans women have used women's toilets longer than you've been alive without issue. Full stop. That is a fact. We've now like addressed the implicit part to this conversation. And then we can like take on the next point. Banning trans women won't prevent or deter predators, but can endanger women. And also, your whole claim is, if you can't tell who's a trans woman, any man could say they're a trans woman. Well, you can't tell who's a trans man, any man could say they're a trans man. So this whole thing is rubbish. Your argument is stupid. Go home. But I think what's important is really like taking on these premises, because otherwise, if you just take on their framing of the argument, you're teaching people that that framing is true. So yeah, tricking people into using their premises furthers their arguments. And it really limits the discussion. We're constantly having this stupid argument about toilets. I've used a women's toilets every day of my life for the last 10 years. I'm going to do so until I die. That's it. That's the full argument. And we're still having this stupid argument. But what we should be talking about is like why trans kids don't have healthcare, or why over half of trans people have been sexually assaulted. Like, this is the discussion we should be having. But we're not, because we're only ever taking the other position in this thing that they make up. They can't actually justify a single position they hold without creating false dichotomies. That's like a fundamental issue of their worldview. When they say we should only segregate society by birth, sex, or gender, if you say, well, we haven't done that with either of those things before, so maybe we could just... There's other ways to do it, but they can't justify their argument without it. And like, the whole thing is they benefit from people being ignorant. Like, every study ever that has looked at people who know trans people or have a trans person in their life has found that if you do have a trans person in your life, you're more likely to support trans rights. So if you are constantly confusing people, keeping them ignorant, making sure they don't know what's going on, making sure they don't even know what a trans man is, then they'll be more likely to support garbage gender critical views. So yeah, don't ever accept their framing. Always think about what arguments you want to make, directly contradict their premises as well as the thing they're saying. Don't just fall into their like trap. And I think always target your audience and not your interlocutor, which means the person you're arguing against. So if I am on the radio and I'm arguing against somebody, like I was ambushed when I went on the BBC, and I didn't know that I was going to be arguing against the gender critical, and I said my thing, and then they were like, right, now we're going to hear from someone or other who believes the other thing, and I was like, okay. And then she said some crazy thing about, like, trans people are here because of illegal aliens trying to take over the government or something. Like, it was that level, like, conspiracy crazy. And I thought, if I wanted to argue against her, I could. But I'm not here to argue against her. I'm not here to change her mind. She's probably not capable of any kind of rational analysis at all. I'm here for the audience. And I think, by just me saying, well, that was ridiculous, and then moving on, has presented my argument better. Like, it made her look so stupid, me not even needing to respond her thing to what she said, that I think that was the best. So whenever you're arguing with these people, really just think, if someone else is coming here and looking at this, are they going to be benefiting from what I've just said? Because otherwise, what's the point? Like, why are you even doing this? You're not going to change this idiot's mind. So just move on. Some other just classic false dichotomies that are worth being aware of. The classic one, women's rights or trans rights. ban all trans people from sport or have no categories at all, ban trans women from women's spaces or have a total free-for-all, put all trans women in men's prisons or just force rapists and their victims to share a cell. Like, these are all arguments they really use. Ban trans people from using their legal documents or have no protection for women at all. Science or being nice. I don't know, have you ever actually said to someone, be kind? Because gender criticals seem to think that the main thing they're pushing back against is being told to be kind. I don't know. None of them are kind at all. Anyway, here's Poppy after too many of my talks. Enjoying a drink. So, I hope I'm doing all right for time. Don't know, we'll see. 5 minutes? God, that's not going to happen. We'll see what we can do. Okay, right, I'll go a bit faster on some of these. So one of the things that they do is try and claim that they have the pro-science position. And they do that for, like, legitimacy. But they don't have, we all know their position isn't based on science. But I think we need to constantly be pointing this out. Like, when the classic one is with biological sex, which I think I focus on quite a lot, but it's like one of their core things. They're constantly saying about biological men and biological women, and we say things like, well, trans people should be able to use the right facilities and blah, blah, blah. We should also be saying, this person is a science denier. What they're saying is factually wrong, and trans people should be able to use the right facilities. Because them presenting themselves as pro-science inherently makes people think that we are then anti-science. And that's just wrong, and that's bad for everyone, because whenever science deniers get in charge, you end up with whatever the hell's going on in the USA at the moment. Bad time. So yeah, it gives them legitimacy, and it allows them to, like, pretend they're not driven by hate. Sorry, I'm going to rush through this. So yeah, this one's kind of difficult because internationally, there's this anti-science movement now, and it's getting more power, and it's affecting vaccines and all kinds of things. But I just think we really need to hammer down on them being science deniers and just, like, call it at every opportunity, constantly call them out on their science, learn all of their, like, fake groups like SEGM and GenSect and all this kind of stuff, and tell people about them, and learn all their stupid debunks like rapid onset gender dysphoria. Like, it's a very easy debunk. You have no evidence for this at all. The one paper you have didn't even look at children and has been retracted. Yeah, I'd love to tell a story about always looking up what they say, but I don't think I have time. Maybe I will at the end. Here's another cat break. This is Poppy in Sync. If you go on Instagram and do hashtag cats in sinks, there's a lot of good material there. So maybe the last section I'll look at is media control and free speech. We all know that they completely, like, dominate the media, and they're very litigious. Like, I've had several gender criticals threaten to sue me. I had one raise tens of thousands of pounds to sue me, which never happened, but it was absolutely terrifying. One of the most stressed times I've had. And they do not like criticism, and that has sort of filtered all the way up into the media, which is now scared to criticize them or doesn't want them to. And it's allowing them to, like, rewrite history, as we've seen with the recent EHRC stuff, where their new line is, trans people never had rights in the first place. I don't know why you're all in a fuss. Now, we'll skip over the examples. So I hope it's obvious why they do it. It's because the propaganda actually works. The, like, opinion of the public of trans people since this trans panic has happened has just gone down. There's less support for trans people now than there was 10 years ago, and that's because people buy into this rubbish. And yeah, it's very difficult, but I think it's worth being aware of this. But also it makes them money. I'm not a professional trans person. I don't do loads of talks and stuff. Lots of them are professional transphobes. They actually tour the world saying horrible things about trans people, and it's their full-time job. So quickly on this, how to combat it. One of the most important things, I think, is you can be so tempted into just arguing with any of these horrible people. You get, like, an invite to go on a YouTube show, on the radio, like, we need a trans person to argue back against Helen Joyce or whatever. And you're like, I'm going to do it. But then you find out that the title is like, Are Trans People All Insane? With Professor Helen Joyce, feminist and women's right defender, and random trans person. And it's hosted by like Hitler Part 2 or something. And the framing of that, if you go on that show, you could absolutely smash it. You could get every single line down, and it will not matter, because all that people ever see, and all the trans community we see on Twitter the next day, is a screenshot of you on this show saying, are trans people subhuman? And then you've just like legitimized it. So I think you've really got to focus about who you're engaging with and why and what you're doing and how much of it you can control, how much of the platform you can control. Yeah, don't get sued. It's horrible. Cat break 5. There's Poppy with her cushion with her face on it, which the dog was terrified of. I'm going to skip over this one entirely. There's another Poppy one. So, hopefully, in summary, if you're going to argue with these people, which I think is beneficial, do not let them hide their position. And that's important for the people watching. The people watching need to know that you're not just some crazy person who hates this person even though all they did was say sex is real. You need to unearth the horrible views and get them to say them out loud. Don't support their premises. When they say, we think that the EHRC is just confirming that the Equality Act should be based on biological sex, you'd be like, you're a science denier. Biological sex doesn't mean that. I think the position of the EHRC is terrible, and here's the reasons why. Don't just be like, I think that's wrong, full stop, end of thing. You need to take on the premises directly. Don't defend their false dichotomies, similar thing. Don't buy into sex being binary and immutable. I'm really going hard on this at the moment. I think it's important. Don't buy into the idea, this is terribly written, sorry. Don't fall into the trap of thinking that maybe this person isn't that extreme. Maybe they don't want to ruin all trans people's lives. If at this point in the gender critical movement's history, 10 years ago, I could totally believe meeting a gender critical person who maybe just had concerns about something. Now, today, in the time of Donald Trump and Elon Musk and J.K. Rowling, they know. They absolutely know what the gender critical movement is. They want to create a world without trans people in it, and you do not fall into the trap of thinking they don't. And just don't buy into this idea of both sidesing. Our movements are not the same. We're not two equal and opposite forces. We're a human rights movement. They're oppressors. That's the end, with some of it skipped.
Thank you, Katy. That was educational and entertaining, if I can say, especially the cat breaks. That was marvelous. We are coming right up to the official end of the conference, so there's stuff that we'll do afterwards, but I think it would be a disservice if we didn't let a few questions for Katy through. So, anybody? Yes, here.
Yeah, definitely. I think that the whole movement has been trending towards, for anyone who didn't hear, the question was, has the Supreme Court ruling made them go more mask off than usual? I think they have been trending towards more mask off and revealing their position more and more over time. They've kind of dropped this idea of we're just, innocent feminists who just have concerns. They still hide a lot of their position, but I think that there's a couple of things. As transphobia gets more and more mainstreamed, they're going to feel more and more comfortable saying extreme things and thinking they still look respectable. But another thing is, they're a supremacist movement, and part of what motivates them to do this is they feel powerful when they have control over other people. And as more and more official organizations recognize their views, they feel more powerful and they feel like they can get away with saying stuff. I think, if it keeps going further, if we ended up with a far-right government, we'll see them get even more and more extreme. And it's not that their positions are changing, it's just they feel more comfortable. They'll be doing sig hails if they they get the freedom to do it. Not all of them, some of them, disclaimer. But yeah, I think they're definitely getting more mask off for sure. Any more questions?
We have a roving mic.
Oh, great.
Microphone. So something I found quite useful in social media is how you mentioned how they will hide their intention behind various dog whistles and things like that, is to do what I call looking at the camera and explaining the joke. And that is to not talk to them, but talk to the people watching and say, they are saying this, and they actually mean this. And cite those sources and things like that. Do you think that's a useful strategy for us going forwards? I mean, you said they're going a bit more mask off now, or do you think that's a useful thing?
Yeah, I think it's really important to like decode it for the audience, because it can be so easy to be caught up in the world that we exist in. You know all their stupid dog whistles. You know the first 4 lines of their counter arguments. You know all of the people. You know all the history, and it can be so easy to come in with this like super specific debunk of some stupid thing they hold. And the passers-by have no idea. And if you stop and you're like, how would I explain this to like my grandma or something? I think that is a really good and useful tactic. And it will sometimes get them to react, because they're there often to like cause you distress. Like, oh, I'm going to go and wind some trans people up or something. And if you like turn around to the camera and be like, this dickhead here is trying to remove my human rights, but I'm going to show you why they're wrong. They don't like that. So yeah, sometimes they do. Sometimes they crack out the slurs straight away then. So that can be good, yeah.
Hey, brilliant presentation, as always. You've obviously shown us what their techniques are. Have you had any success in explaining that to other people online, prominent people, influencers, so that they are more aware of the gender critical techniques?
Yeah, it can be difficult to explain it to people, because sometimes when someone gives you their ear, you feel like, right, and then they've got this giant network and they do all this stuff and you feel like you're the Charlie Day meme with all the boards and stuff, because the gender critical movement is just crazy, like the stuff that they've got away with. I have explained it to people. I usually don't particularly target it, because I feel like I'm crazy when I'm explaining it to people. But often when people see the videos I do or something, they'll say, wow, I didn't realize that it was this bad. And then once they've said that, I can be like, you haven't seen anything yet, mate. And then you give them like another piece of information. You can keep going until you feel like they're losing touch with reality or something. But yeah, I think that there's this, in the Helen Joyce quote where she said, trans people, we should reduce their number or whatever. She also said, we need to stop trying to win over hearts and minds, and we need to talk to the decision makers. And I think via taking control of the decision makers, like Keir Starmer and Wes Streeting, that has won over some hearts and minds, because a lot of people just think the government is the authority and they just believe it. But I think we traditionally have been the other way around, where we've always been like, win over hearts and minds and it will trickle up. I think they've been quite successful in targeting influential people, and it is something we should be aware of and maybe try and talk to more. Well, we need to talk to our MPs more, basically. But talking to more influencers and celebrities and stuff, if possible, would be good too, yeah. I hope that answers the question.
Hi. Do you have a favorite anecdote from your endless hours of arguing that just highlights the ridiculousness?
Sorry, say that again?
Do you have a favourite anecdote from your endless hours of arguing?
Oh,
that shows the position.
I get to go back to the thing that I said I might be able to show the example of. Wait, where did we go? It was on the one before this. So I was saying on here, always look up what they're referring to, as it often contradicts their claims. So this has actually happened so many times now that I've kind of lost track of them, but I had the first moment where I like realized this was we were like, 140 comments deep in some pointless Twitter thread at 3 a.m. or whatever. And this person said, trans women's breasts and cis women's breasts are completely different. Trans women's breasts are just moobs, or, it's just gynecomastia. And cis women's are breasts with breast ducts and stuff. Here is papers to prove it. And they sent 4 papers in response. And it was called differing trans women and cis women's breast tissue whatever, released 15 years ago or something. And there was lots of people in this discussion, and lots of people just started replying straight away, like, so what, science is biased, this kind of response. And I thought, I'm just going to read these papers and just look at them. And all 4 of the papers were just like, in conclusion, trans women and cis women's breast tissue is biologically identical. And I couldn't believe it. I was like, you've not only shot yourself in the foot, you've brought 4 peer-reviewed sources for me, like, for my position. And I can't, that isn't a one-off. That was a first time. And I felt like I had to tell someone. I was like, look at this, look what this person's done. But like, they do it all the time. We just had one just the other day where on Blue Sky, you don't see as many of them, but this person come up smugly and was like, there was someone having an argument about biological sex, and they're like, well, if sex isn't binary, can you explain ginkgo trees? And I didn't know what ginkgo tree was, Googled it, turns out it's a tree which is sexually dimorphic, so there are male trees and there are female trees, like holly bushes, for example. And so I just, like, the classic thing here is you do, like, okay, ginkgo trees, see what it is, then you go sex change. And then what comes up first? Loads of papers studying how ginkgo trees can change sex. It turns out individual branches on one tree can change sex. The sex change can just take months, but it can take years. You can even graft branches from one tree onto another one, and then sometimes the branch will change sex and sometimes it won't. So it turns out that ginkgo trees, which I'd never heard of before, are like these amazing transgender, transsexual, intersex individuals which have hundreds of year-long history where they can actually change sex more than once. It was incredible. And I was like, this is why you should always look up what they say, because you can often use their own evidence to dunk on them, which is hilarious. And then you learn about ginkgo trees or cis women breast tissue density or whatever. So yeah, I don't know. I've got so many anecdotes. Talk forever.
Thank you so much for your talk. I wanted to ask if over time you've noticed kind of talking points on the margins making their way to the centre, and if so, are there any that you've noticed more recently kind of on the margins kind of gaining ground? Talking points that we should start to be wary of?
Like gender critical ones?
Yes. Thanks.
I mean, I guess it's hard to say which ones are on the margins still. It's kind of difficult, I guess, because I have my head like so watching what all they're doing. It feels like when they were when you first saw them saying things like eliminate transgenderism, think, well, actually, Janice Raymond was saying this in the 70s, but that was a fringe position then. And it's still kind of a fringe position now, but like we had, what's his name, Michael something, from the Daily Wire saying that we should eliminate transgenderism, and suddenly it's like a mainstream thing, and they had all the debate about it. I don't know. I think one of the things with the gender critical movement is that they haven't come up with anything new at all, full stop, since 1965 or something, 1970. I don't know. I wasn't around then, but they really have no new ideas, and so lots of their fringe positions that are now becoming mainstream are like ban trans women from all women's spaces. Like they're even trying to ban trans women from women's book clubs, and that's like a crazy position, but there's now a mainstream gender critical position. Taking banning healthcare for under 25s was a crazy fringe position till very recently, where they're really going to try and push to do that in the UK. Like genuinely, it's going to be one of the next pushes. See, I don't know how good an answer for that question is, but I'd say that basically whatever is currently their main focus, that is absolutely not their next focus, and whichever is the next step, that will be their next thing, and it's just like a slide of how far they can push this dial before they open the camps, really. Sorry, that's pessimistic. Before we win.
So I'd like to come out as argument curious. How do I not get sued?
Yeah, that is really difficult. I messaged loads of lawyers when it started happening and being like how do I navigate this? Because it's quite terrifying. I think be American. That's good. You can say anything then. The UK's court system for defamation just seems really terrible. It really seems like It's just there to protect rich people from criticism. So if you're arguing with some absolute nobody who is clearly there for the thrill of arguing, you can probably call them anything. But if you wanted to say, if you wanted to say like, J.K. Rowling endangers this group or something. There was an example where a trans person in Canada, I think, said something along the lines of J.K. Rowling endangers trans children or something. And J.K. Rowling threatened to sue her and she had to back down. And that's because she made this like direct claim. She said, this person in particular is doing this thing like as a fact. Whereas if she had said, in my opinion, views held by J.K. Rowling and other people with similar views to her are creating an environment which could lead to the harm of children, then you're not making like a specific claim about someone, and you're not presenting it as a fact. You're saying, in my opinion. That gives you much more defense, because when it comes to the like defamation process, if you're actually in the courtroom, you need to either prove that it's like a reasonably held opinion, like genuinely and reasonably held opinion, and it's presented as such, or that it's true. And both of those are kind of hard to prove when they've got a more expensive lawyer than you, even if both of them are true. So yeah, I think pick your targets and make sure everything is clear. Every accusation you make is your opinion. But I think when I'm arguing, I think it's more important getting across the facts rather than like destroying some particular person. So if like if J.K. Rowling does say something horrible, it can just be like, well, trans healthcare actually benefits trans children, and here's the studies why. Like that's a better response than being like, J.K. Rowling does this thing. I don't know. I hope that helps.
Okay. With regret, that is going to have to be the end of our time with Katy, but let's give her one more round of applause. Thank you. So, if you'll allow me to just take a couple more minutes of your time to wrap things up here. This conference was a passion. Thank you. A passion and, put optimistically, something of a burden for me and the other people at FGEN over the last few months. But what a joy it has been to see it come to fruition. I need to extend some sincere thanks to all the staff here at KCL, the catering staff, the people at King's Venues, Anastasios, who has organized the AV recording of all of our keynote sessions, which will be available on YouTube shortly. To Angela Smith in particular, she helped me quite a bit arranging with security, which we did have to do for this event, as well as checking everybody in, making sure that everybody was going to have a good copacetic time. I'd also like to thank Jessica Lynch from the Diversity and Inclusion Office here at King's. They not only gave us lots of support, but a little bit of money too, in the form of a grant. So thank you to them. Our conference could not have happened without the unpaid volunteer work of some really astounding people. So to Hannah Rose, Josiah Brennan, to Vickery Stamp, to Caden Schumacher, and to Michael Pereira. Some of them were your chairs today. They did so much more behind the scenes. I am deeply indebted to you, and I will never pay it back because you volunteered. Thank you, all of you. Nearly finally, to my fellow FGEN directors, to Teresa Davis, who's been an absolute star in so many ways I couldn't possibly name them all without going on another hour, but just lately she was in charge of the mic here today. And to Natasha Kennedy, another director at FGEN, she's been doing just knocking it out of the park in so many ways. Recent peer-reviewed publications showing that puberty blocker bans are absolutely harmful and we need to get rid of them. Doing battle with TERFs behind the scenes, and helping to make this conference the amazing educational locus that it has been. So to the two of you, thank you so much. And then finally, I'd like to thank all of you. This conference was for you. It was to give a place where all of you could get together, meet each other, see that we are not the crazy ones. and that we can take our non-craziness, our brilliance and our passion back out into the community where we can actually do battle against the people trying to destroy us and win. So thank you, every single one of you. This is all thanks to you. Thank you.